The elderly man stepped into the high-end boutique, his worn coat and scuffed shoes starkly contrasting with the store's polished floors and luxurious displays. The young salesman sneered, barely hiding his disgust. "Sir, I think you're in the wrong place," he said, his voice dripping with arrogance. Snickers came from nearby customers as the old man quietly examined an expensive suit. "That one's worth more than your entire outfit," the salesman scoffed. But just then, the boutique's manager rushed out, her face pale with shock. "Mr. Whitmore," she gasped, "we had no idea you were coming." The room fell silent. The sneering salesman's face turned ghostly white. He had just insulted the owner of the entire luxury brand. An elderly man stepped into a high-end boutique, his worn-out coat and scuffed shoes standing in stark contrast to the store's sleek, polished floors and glimmering glass displays. He moved with quiet dignity, his sharp eyes scanning the luxurious merchandise. A young salesman, dressed impeccably in a designer suit, barely concealed his disdain as he watched the old man shuffle in. With an exaggerated sigh, he approached. "Sir, perhaps you'd be more comfortable at a store down the street," he said, forcing a tight-lipped smile. "This boutique is exclusive." The elderly man raised an eyebrow, but remained silent. Instead of responding, he walked over to a row of tailored suits, running his fingers over the fine fabric. "Those are custom pieces," the salesman added, stepping closer as if to shield the suits from the old man's touch. "They start at $10,000. Maybe I can show you something more affordable." His condescending tone dripped with arrogance. A few customers glanced over, sensing the tension. Some smirked, watching the spectacle unfold, while others simply ignored it. But the elderly man didn't seem offended. He simply smiled a slow, knowing smile that unsettled the young salesman. "Tell me," the old man said, his voice calm but commanding, "is this how you treat all your customers?" The salesman scoffed. "We cater to a certain clientele." His eyes flicked down to the old man's worn-out shoes. "People who actually belong here." At that moment, the boutique's manager, a middle-aged woman in an elegant black dress, emerged from the back of the store. She noticed the old man and immediately froze, her expression shifting from mild curiosity to absolute panic. "Mr. Whitmore," she gasped, rushing over. I had no idea you'd be visiting today." The salesman blinked in confusion. "Wait, you know this man?" The manager turned, her face pale. "Know him?" she whispered harshly. "He owns this entire brand." The color drained from the salesman's face. He swallowed hard, his arrogance melting into sheer horror. The other customers who had been snickering fell silent, eyes widening in realization. Mr. Whitmore chuckled softly. "Ah, so now I belong here." The salesman stammered, his confidence shattered. I didn't mean to offend you, sir." "I had no idea." "You didn't bother to find out," Mr. Whitmore interrupted, his voice still calm, but now carrying an edge. "You judged me based on my appearance. And in doing so, you failed one of the most basic principles of business respect." The young man's hands trembled slightly. I'm deeply sorry, sir. It was a mistake." Mr. Whitmore studied him for a long moment before finally speaking. "Indeed, it was." The manager turned to the salesman, her expression dark. "Pack your things. You're done here." "Wait, please," the young man begged. "I'll do better, I swear." Mr. Whitmore held up a hand, silencing him. "There's nothing more to discuss." The salesman, now red-faced and defeated, slowly backed away, his career crumbling before his eyes. Mr. Whitmore then turned to the manager. "Ensure that every employee understands this wealth is not measured by appearances, but by character." The manager nodded vigorously. "Of course, Mr. Whitmore. I'll make sure of it." Satisfied, the elderly man gave a small nod and turned to leave. But just as he reached the door, he paused, looking back at the silent crowd. "Remember this," he said, his voice carrying through the room. Treat everyone with dignity, because you never know who might be walking through that door. The elderly man adjusted his coat as he walked toward the door, his presence commanding a silence that none in the store had expected. The once arrogant salesman stood frozen, his face drained of color, as realization crashed over him. The store manager, still breathless from the shock, turned to scold the young man, but the older gentleman simply raised a hand, stopping her. "There's no need for that," he said, his voice calm but firm. "Some lessons are best learned through experience." The salesman swallowed hard, unable to meet the man's gaze. He had assumed the old man was just another nobody, someone unworthy of his time or respect. And yet, here he was, the very person who owned the luxury empire he worked for. One by one, the other customers in the store began murmuring amongst themselves. Some looked at the old man with newfound admiration, while others cast judgmental glances at the young salesman. The moment was heavy with realization. In a world obsessed with appearances, they had all been quick to judge. The old man took one last look around the boutique, his eyes lingering on the expensive suits and pristine displays. "Value isn't found in labels," he finally said, "and respect isn't something you give only to those who look like they belong." With that, he turned toward the exit. The manager scrambled after him. "Mr. Whitmore, please allow us to make it up to you." He paused at the door, but didn't turn around. "No need," he said. "I got what I came for." As the door closed behind him, the weight of his words hung in the air like an unshakable truth. The store remained eerily silent, every employee and customer still processing what had just happened. The salesman, who had once smirked in arrogance, now stood motionless, his hands trembling at his sides. His entire perception of the world had just been turned upside down. The manager turned to him, her expression a mixture of disappointment and disbelief. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" she asked, her voice low but sharp. The young man swallowed hard. He had been so quick to judge the old man by his clothes, by his appearance, never once considering that true wealth didn't always need to be flaunted. A woman who had been browsing handbags shook her head in disapproval. "You never know who you're speaking to," she muttered, before walking out, others soon following. Meanwhile, Mr. Whitmore strolled down the street, a faint smile on his face. He had seen this kind of arrogance before, and he knew that in time, the lesson would settle in. As he disappeared into the crowd, he left behind something far greater than just a business he left behind, a story that would be retold for years. A reminder that respect should never be measured by appearance.